Hello everyone and welcome back. Today we're going to be actually starting on our mod. I know the previous episode was quite a while ago. I was kind of waiting for the response to that, see what it would be like, to see if the series is worthwhile, because that first episode took forever to make. But now we're finally going to get started writing some code. As I said in a previous episode, I expect you to be familiar with programming already. I'm not going to be teaching that. I don't recommend learning it through modding. I recommend just going through it in more conventional means, just starting with Hello World, working your way up through examples if you don't already know how to program. If you're not familiar with Java, but you are familiar with another language, you should be okay. Alright, so let's get to creating our first class. So I'm going to right click on common, and I named it common. You may have named it something like source or whatever, src. I use common. It doesn't really matter what you name that folder, and I'm going to say new class. Now for our package, the convention used for Java is to have your package set up kind of like a URL, but in reverse. So, for example, you might, I think there are quite a few packages that would be like com.something.package, whatever, something like that. I use net.silentchaos512 and then something to with the name of the mod. So for gems, I just use gems. The mod's called silence gems, but my name's already in there, so no need to be too redundant, in my opinion. We're going to call our package net.silentchaos512.tutorial. You can name yours whatever, just as long as you stay consistent, it doesn't matter. Now this first file, we're going to name it the same as our mod ID, which preferably should be the same as what you name the folder and your project. So over here I've got tutorial mod with both words having the first letter capitalized, no special characters. You cannot have spaces or anything like that in class names, of course. And our superclass can be object, that's fine, and we don't have any interfaces that we need to inherit from either. So just enter the class name in the package. Alright, so there are a couple of useful shortcuts that are good to know in Eclipse. Control-Shift-O will organize your imports, and Control-Shift-F will auto-format. I'm not using Eclipse's default formatter. I'm using a slightly customized one that has a tab size of 2 spaces instead of the default 4. Whatever you use, it doesn't really matter. Just be consistent. Alright, so we're going to start off above the class declaration. We're going to add an annotation. So that's @mod, and we're going to give it some parameters. I don't quite know exactly how annotations work. I've never bothered to read up on them. I just know enough to make this work. Okay, and we're going to be referencing some variables that we have not defined just yet up here. So tutorial mod.modID, and the name is tutorial mod.modName. Our version is tutorial, which I have a very hard time typing, tutorial mod.version, version number. Okay, the exact names don't matter as always, but these are what I use. Okay, and the organized imports I mentioned earlier, Control-Shift-O, I'm going to do that. It will import the mod annotation. Another useful shortcut is if you hold Control and click on something, you can open the source file for it. So if there's something you don't understand, just Control click it, and you can read about it. And you can see there's all these different things in here that we can use with that mod annotation. Some others that are commonly used are the dependencies, which I don't think I've ever used personally, and I honestly don't know what most of these are. But this is good enough for a simple mod. Okay, so next up, let's actually define those constants that we're referencing up there. Another popular way to do this is to have a class that has just these constants in it, and maybe some other constants. I believe the way Pahimar does it is he has a class called reference that he puts these constants in, and a couple of others. I prefer to put them in my mod file itself, just because there are quite a few classes that are named reference, and sometimes it could be Eclipse can be a bit finicky about picking the right one. So these are all strings. So the mod ID is going to be preferably the same as the class. This is the mod ID that I keep mentioning. You don't want to use any special characters in here, I think. So I normally name it without no spaces, anything like that. Next up is the mod name, and I guess I should mention the mod ID is sort of what identifies your mod. That needs to be unique. The mod name is something that is mostly just there to display for players. It'll show up in the mods menu. It's just a more readable version. So name it whatever you want to name your mod, just to show that you can put special characters in it. I will call it Silence Awesome Tutorial Mod. Just to show you that that doesn't necessarily have to be quite the same as the mod ID. It can be whatever you want it to be. It can contain special characters, spaces, anything like that. But for the mod ID, I don't recommend using special characters. Okay, and finally for the version, you can enter this by hand if you want to, but I recommend doing this. This is something that will get replaced in a build script later on. If you do it this way, you will only have to change your version number in one place whenever you need to change it. If not, you're going to have to change it in 2 or 3 different places every time you want to increase the version number. Alright, so after this, I would put some additional variables if you want to. I'll just put a comment in here. Additional variables, like if you want your own random object, you could declare it like that. If you need to access a random object in some other place, yeah, I'll just leave that line there. Control-Shift-O to organize imports, and that would be java.util.random. And just whatever other variables you may need in your mod instance, put them here. Okay, so now we're going to need another variable with another annotation on it, the instance annotation, and this takes one parameter, the mod ID, and this is going to be a public static instance of tutorial mod, and just call it whatever you want, like instance. That's good enough. Control-Shift-O to fix that annotation, and let's actually take a look at this. And yes, this actually looks like it's a very simple annotation. So yeah, the only thing it takes is the mod ID. Okay, next up we have proxies. These are something I'm going to have to do a bit more reading about. I don't always use the proxies. I know they're typically used whenever you're wanting to register things like tile entities, renderers, things like that. And the way they work is you have a common proxy, which runs on both the client and the server, and a client proxy, which inherits from that, which runs only on the client. Okay, so let's go ahead and set that up, just in case someone needs it. So we've got cited proxy, and the client side, we're going to specify the fully qualified name, I think it's the right term for it, of our proxy class, which we have not created yet. I'm going to call it net.silentks512.tutorial.proxy.client proxy, and you can put that in whatever package makes sense to you. It doesn't really matter where you put it, just organize it in a way that makes sense. Okay, and we've got the server side. And this will be net.silentks512.tutorial.proxy.common-proxy. Okay, and we're going to put that above public static common proxy. Okay, and if this is on the client side, that will be the client proxy here. And if it's on the server side, that'll just be common proxy. So why don't we go ahead and create those classes really quickly. So I'm just going to go ahead and right click on this existing package here, new class. You could click on common again, but if you click on the package, it'll go ahead and point you to that package. So we're wanting to make a sub-package in there called proxy, and we're going to call you common proxy. And I don't believe we inherit from any particular class or implement any particular interface. We just have a class. I'm going to go ahead and just format that. And that's all we need in here for now. If we need to add anything in here, I will, but for now we're good. Okay, so I'm going to right click on the proxy package, new class, and client proxy. This time we want to inherit from the common proxy class that we created right here. And I probably could have just typed in common proxy like that since it's in the same package. Otherwise, use the browse button and type it in and make sure you get the right one. Okay, so we got client proxy extends common proxy, format that. Don't need to worry about anything else. Okay, so let's organize our imports. That should fix our errors. And it does. Okay, so we've got the start of our mod here, but there's more we need to do in this file. So when Forge is launching Minecraft and loading up all the mods, it goes through 3 cycles, or 3 separate stages of loading each mod. Those stages are pre-initialization, initialization, and post-initialization. Typically, in pre-initialization, you would load a config file if you have one, which I recommend. Register all your blocks and items. And in initialization, you would do things like add your recipes, register event handlers, and post-initialization is a bit more specialized. I don't have a good example in the file I have open in my other monitor. It doesn't actually do anything in post-init. I think in gems, that's where I register all my Thaumcraft stuff. And the reason this is divided into 3 separate stages, and why you would register recipes in initialization and not pre-initialization, is you may have recipes that use items from another mod. So when Forge is setting up, it's calling pre-initialization on all the mods first. And then after it's done with that for all mods, it will call initialization for all mods. So that ensures that the items that you're looking for are registered if you're doing recipes in initialization. So I'm definitely not an expert on this, but I hope that that explanation made enough sense. I will do my best to put things in the right spots, but I can't make any guarantees. You may just have to just keep that in mind. If you run into issues, try moving stuff to a different initialization phase. Okay, so we're going to have another annotation, event handler. This is an extremely common one. We'll use it in many cases. And we're going to make a function. I call mine preinit. It doesn't matter what you call the function. What matters here is the parameters that you're passing in. So we need fml pre-initialization event, and I just press Control space to autocomplete it. And let's call that event. It doesn't really matter what we call that. What matters is that we are taking an fml pre-initialization event. That's how it knows what stage that we're doing, what event we're actually handling with the event handler here. Okay, so again, we're going to do things like load configs, initialize blocks and items, and things like that. Okay, so let's go ahead and organize imports to fix that event handler. Okay, and we're going to do another event handler, and I'm going to call this one init, and this will take FML initialization event. And here we are going to do things like register recipes, and I also do or dictionary in the same place. I don't think that really matters. You could probably do that in pre-init just fine. And we're going to register event handlers if we have any. And in Super Multi-Drills, this is also where I detect other mods to see if, for example, Thermal Foundation is installed. So that's something else that I would recommend doing in init. You could probably get away with doing that in pre-init, but since I use that detection for recipes, I put it in init, where it makes the most sense. Okay, and finally, we have the post initialization. So that's FML. Why did you not detect that? Oh, I'm doing things the wrong way. That's why. Public void, I call mine post init. Again, the name of the function doesn't matter. It's just the parameter that matters. It takes FML post initialization event. And I'm not sure what you do here. So this is a pretty much complete mod file. There is one more thing that we can do down below. I recommend having your own creative tab. So here's an easy way to do that. I'm going to define a public static instance of creative tabs. And we could call that something like creative tab, I suppose. And we're going to assign that the value of a new creative tabs instance. And we're going to call you tab tutorial mod. I'm not quite sure what that is. I guess it's like a unique identifier. I think in your localization file you'll want to put that as your key, but we'll talk about localization files another time. Okay, and we're going to want to override one function inside of here. So you put a curly brace after that instead of a semicolon, hit enter, and it put the closing brace down for us. And we're going to override a function, get tab icon item. And here we're going to want to return an item whose icon we want to use for our creative tab. Normally you would want to use an item from your mod, but since we don't currently have any, I'm going to return something from Minecraft just as a placeholder. So the items class contains a bunch of references to all the items in Minecraft. And let's see, what's something that would be good? Why don't we use chicken? I don't know if that's cooked chicken or raw chicken. I think that would be cooked. And again, if you're curious about something, just control-click on it. It'll take you to where it's defined. And I'm guessing that's raw because there's cooked chicken right after that. Okay, organize imports. And what are you complaining about? Oh, we need a semicolon after that last curly brace there. Okay, and more organizing imports. Okay, so we got net.minecraft.item.item, and there's nothing else called items. Alright, so we've only been working for 20 minutes, and we've got our basic mod file and our proxy stuff here. So let me go ahead and double check my debug configuration. I can't remember Yes, I do have the tutorial mod, so why don't we click the icon that looks like a little bug to start debugging. Okay, that took an absurdly long time for Minecraft to start up just then. I don't know why, but oh wow, I've actually got a lot of mods showing up here. So let's take a look at our mods list. So let's see, what have we got here? Silence Awesome Tutorial Mod. We don't have any particular information about it, and that version number is not getting replaced. That will be replaced only when you build the mod, which is a topic that I'll cover some other time. But our mod is showing up. Of course, it doesn't add anything, so playing with it's not going to do anything, but it does show up. And, oh yeah, I do actually have a lot of mods in here because I was experimenting with a lot of different things. Okay, so before we go doing things like adding blocks and items, which will probably be in the next episode, there are some more things that I recommend doing. Currently I've got one of the Super Multi-Drills packages open. I've got two classes of note here. There is names, which is used to basically store all the unlocalized names for a variety of items and things like that. And then we got strings, which is just some random stuff. I could probably merge this into another class. It's pretty simple, honestly. I don't think we'll be using these two values over here. The resource prefix, however, is something that's pretty useful. So just for the sake of simplicity, I'm actually going to put that in here. So let's go ahead and just create a public static final constant, a string, call it resource prefix. And this is used mostly for textures. And I'll get to where exactly that's used. I honestly can't remember exactly. The way I've got my mods set up, I never have to touch this variable very often. So we're going to say that is equal to the mod ID converted to lowercase, and then we're going to add a semicolon onto the end of that. So what we would get is tutorial mod semicolon. And when we're trying to get textures for our blocks and items, we're going to have the name of the item appended onto that. So tutorial mod semicolon item, something like that. That'll be the name that the item is referred to internally. But I'll go ahead and just leave that there, that little comment there, for anyone who's seeing this in the future. I'll try to come back and comment this file a bit more before I upload it to GitHub, so that if anyone needs to refer to this file later on, it will have some detailed explanations into it, or in the file itself. Okay, so let's go ahead and close that. So why don't we create our own names file as well. So let's create a new class. net.silentchaos.512.tutorial.lib. Again, you could put it in whatever package makes sense to you. And we're going to call you names. This does not need to inherit from any class, does not need to have any particular interface. This is just going to have a bunch of public final static strings in it. Okay, and I'll go ahead and close that. We don't need it. Let me see if there's anything else that we need to set up. Okay, I do have some utility classes here. I think I will actually create a localization helper class really quickly. Localizations are something that are a bit tricky to work with at times. It's not so bad if you have a helper class to give you a hand. And I suppose this could be a good way to introduce the concept. So I'm going to create a new sub package called util in our tutorial package. And we will call you localization helper. Okay, doesn't need to inherit from anything in particular. So let me show you what a localization file looks like really quickly. So typically what you will have is this file right here, en_us, that is American English, the default language for Minecraft. And it's basically just a collection of keys and values. This is called the unlocalized name. That's the key. So typically you'll have something like this, plus the dot name for the item's name. And then after that, you will have the name localized for that language. This file here is, I believe, a Chinese localization file that someone donated, which apparently Eclipse doesn't like to display correctly, but you can see the keys are all the same. It's just what's on the right side of the equal sign is different. So I'm going to create a couple of quick constants up here. So that's public static final, as always. We'll have a lot of those. And I'm going to make a miscellaneous prefix or misc prefix, and this will be misc dot, and we're going to have a resource prefix after the dot. So just to be good, I'm going to say, why is that not working? Oh, I forgot to type in the string. Tutorial mod dot resource prefix. Okay, so that would be misc dot tutorial mod colon, and we're going to do something very similar. This will be our, let's do block first, block prefix. Now I'll do item just so that it'll line up a bit better. And that'll be item dot, and then our resource prefix again. And then finally, blocks. And I think for blocks I do tile. Let me double check that. Yes, we do tile dot for blocks. I don't think it really matters how you do this exactly, but this is the way I learned to do it, so this is the way I'm going to do it. Okay, and I'm going to create a couple of quick functions in here that will make getting stuff from our localization file a bit easier. Okay, so our first function is going to be get localized string. We're probably not going to call this one directly too much. It'll take one parameter, a string, which is the key, and we're going to reference a vanilla class, the stat collector, and we're going to translate to local. And we're going to pass in that key, and we're going to trim it in case there are any white space characters that we have accidentally inserted at the beginning or the end of the value. Okay, and that's all for that function. Okay, so now we're going to create a bunch of functions that are going to call the one that we just wrote. Okay, so I'm going to want one for our miscellaneous stuff, which is just what I normally use for random things that appear in tooltips, things like that. So that'll take one parameter, a string value, and we're going to return the get localized string function that we just wrote, and we're going to pass in the misc prefix with the key appended to it. And that's pretty much all that we're going to be doing in this for all the other functions, just appending a prefix, or appending the key to a prefix that we've written up above. Okay, so now I want a function for getting block description keys. And the way I normally do this is in the localization file. I will have the name of the block and .name for the actual localized name of the block, and then DEC description for or DESC description for tooltips, basically. And in some of my localization files, you may see it just like that, or you may see description 1, description 2, and so on. That's just a convenience for multi-line descriptions that I use. So let's see, this will return a string. We're going to say get block description. And we're going to pass in the name of the block and the index, which will be 0 or greater. Okay, so we need to create the key out of the parameters that we've just got. So that will be the item prefix. Or, no, wait, we're doing blocks. Block prefix plus block name plus dot description. And the way I have it set up is if I pass in an index of 0, it doesn't append any number. So we're going to use a ternary operator to say if it is greater than 0, we're going to append that index value to it. If not, we're going to not add anything. Okay, and as before, we're going to call the get localized string and pass in that key that we just created. Okay, what if you want some key that is like this but has something after the description? We could create something like that as well. So let's call this get block key, and we're going to pass in the block name and the subkey, whatever you want to call that. Okay, so I'm going to do something very similar to before, except instead of the dot description, we're going to have a dot and then the key that's passed in above. And get localized string, new key. And I may have said this before, but you don't really need to have this localization helper class. I find it good because I use a lot of tooltips to describe how my items work. So this is very useful for me personally. I recommend doing something kind of similar, but it's up to you really. Okay, so now I'm doing pretty much the same thing I did for the blocks up above, but I'm doing it for items instead. It's going to be pretty much the same code, just a different prefix being used. Okay, that should be all we need, and of course you can modify this class to fit your own needs. Add additional functions if you need them, just whatever you need to do. And again, I will go back and comment this file later on before I upload this to GitHub. I've been recording for 40 minutes, so I think I'm going to stop here. Next episode, we will work on creating a new block. And depending on how much time we have, we may even do an item to go along with that block. Maybe create some kind of ore that can be smelted. But until next time, if you're enjoying the series, don't forget you can leave a like if you want to, or a dislike if you hate it, but hopefully you didn't. And subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you guys in the next video.